Welcome to the Sci-Fi Alien channel, where intergalactic adventures unfold, and the unknown meets the extraordinary. Today, we bring you the story of Princess Ariana, a blind and paralyzed heir to the throne of Lumia Prime, who was rejected by her own people and the galaxy at large. Her strength, intelligence, and willpower went unnoticed, overshadowed by her physical limitations. But one human, Daniel Stonnell, an Earth soldier, saw beyond her disability. What began as a diplomatic mission quickly turned into a powerful bond between two worlds, as Daniel discovered the remarkable woman Ariana truly was. But just when they began to trust each other, betrayal loomed. A Drachnid Empire ambassador, Krell, had been playing them all along, manipulating Ariana's condition for his own sinister purposes. When Ariana's throne, once a tool for mobility, unlocked her hidden powers, it became the key to both her survival and the future of her kingdom. In the midst of battle, Daniel made a life-changing sacrifice, and Ariana's abilities soared to new heights. Now, with the Drachnid forces closing in, the question remains, will Ariana and Daniel's love be enough to save Lumia Prime, or will they be consumed by the forces that seek to tear them apart? Stay tuned, the journey has just begun. Princess Ariana of Lumia Prime had always known what it meant to be different, but it was a difference that the world could never seem to accept. Born into royalty, she should have been celebrated as a symbol of power, grace, and hope for her people. But instead, her blindness and paralysis marked her as a figure of pity, a woman trapped in a body that the galaxy saw as weak and unworthy. The grand halls of the palace, where noble leaders and diplomats from across the galaxy gathered, had never felt more isolating for Ariana. Despite her sharp intellect and unyielding spirit, she was often dismissed and ignored. Her father, King the Lion, had always been her rock, her unwavering protector. He saw in Ariana not a princess to be hidden away, but a leader capable of shaping the future. Yet, even he, with all his power, could not shield her from the prejudice and discrimination that came with her condition. To the court, to the galaxy, Ariana's worth was measured only by her limitations. Every glance of pity, every whispered conversation behind her back, only served to remind her of the role she was forced to play, a prisoner of her own body and the expectations of others. As the years passed, Ariana's loneliness deepened. She knew the eyes that watched her, eyes that never truly saw her. They saw a paralyzed princess, someone to be managed, protected, and controlled, but never someone to be respected. The few who dared approach her did so with an agenda, seeking political favor, but none of them sought to know the person she was beneath her throne, beneath her disability. They came with offers of alliances and promises of power, but never with the simple gesture of understanding or empathy. Yet, Ariana was not weak. Despite the world's rejection, she had built her own strength. Her mind was as sharp as a Lumian crystal, and her spirit was unyielding, shaped by years of isolation and internal struggle. She had learned to navigate the palace and the complex web of court politics with precision, relying on her keen sense of hearing and the advanced technologies integrated into her hover throne. With every passing day, she fought not only against the limitations of her body but against the very society that refused to see her for who she truly was. And then there was the moment that would change everything. A diplomatic mission to strengthen ties with Earth brought Daniel Stonnell to Lumia Prime. Daniel, a soldier from Earth, had faced countless battles, both on the field and within himself. His reputation as a decorated veteran of Earth's special forces preceded him, and his assignment on Lumia Prime was meant to be just another political mission. He had no reason to expect anything out of the ordinary, let alone an encounter that would change his life forever. When Daniel first met Ariana, he saw the same thing that the rest of the galaxy saw, a beautiful but broken princess. But in the brief moments that followed, he began to notice something different. There was a fire in her eyes, a quiet strength in her presence that no one else seemed to recognize. It was subtle at first, but it was there. She wasn't just a figurehead, she was a woman, a leader, someone with the power to change everything. Ariana, for the first time in her life, felt seen. Not for her disability, not for her royal status, but for the person she truly was. Daniel wasn't just drawn to her because of her royal lineage or her intellect. He was captivated by her spirit, her unwillingness to be defined by the world's perception of her. And as they began to work together, something unexpected began to grow between them. Ariana, once isolated in a world of cold, political strategy, found herself opening up to Daniel in ways she hadn't with anyone else. With every shared conversation, every unspoken understanding, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. It wasn't just a connection of minds, it was a connection of souls, something deeper than politics, deeper than obligation. But even as Ariana allowed herself to trust Daniel, she was painfully aware of the court's disdain. There was no place in Lumia Prime for the kind of relationship she and Daniel were beginning to form. No one could understand why a soldier from Earth would care for a princess who had little to offer, save for her title. No one could see past her disability, or her limitations. It was as if the very idea of someone seeing Ariana as she truly was without pity, without judgment was too foreign, too radical for the world around her to accept. And yet, Daniel did see her. He saw beyond the surface, beyond the throne, beyond the title. He saw the incredible woman that Ariana was, and in doing so, he gave her something that she had long been denied, a sense of purpose, a reason to hope. For the first time, Ariana felt the possibility of something more. She could not only be a leader but a partner, a person capable of forging her own future, not one dictated by her disability or the expectations of others. But just as Ariana began to believe in this new version of herself, the galaxy's rejection of her grew louder, more intense. She had always known the world would not accept her, but the idea of Daniel, of their bond, breaking the mold, changing everything, was that even possible? Could one person, one relationship, truly change the way the galaxy saw her, and others like her? Was she, a princess who had been trapped by her condition and by society's prejudices, capable of breaking free? As the challenges grew, Ariana realized that she would have to answer these questions not just for herself, but for her people. Her journey was just beginning, and she would soon discover that the greatest battle she would face wasn't external, but internal. To be a true leader, to be the woman she had always wanted to be, she would need to conquer the barriers that others had built around her and the ones she had built within herself. Daniel Stonnell had always been a man defined by duty and purpose. A decorated soldier of Earth's special forces, he had been forged in the fires of countless battles. His life had been one of conflict, strategy, and survival. Yet, in all his missions, none had prepared him for the complexity and depth of the task that awaited him on Lumia Prime. He was accustomed to facing physical threats, but what he was about to encounter was something far more profound, something that would challenge the very core of his understanding of strength and compassion. When Daniel first arrived on Lumia Prime, it was for a diplomatic mission. The galaxy's political landscape was a tangled web of alliances, and Earth had a stake in maintaining peace with the Lumian royal family. But as Daniel stepped into the majestic halls of the Celestial Palace, he quickly realized that this mission would be unlike any he had encountered before. He had heard the whispers about Princess Ariana, the blind and paralyzed heir to the Lumian throne. She was seen as a figurehead, a woman whose physical limitations rendered her little more than a tool for political maneuvering. To many, Ariana was a symbol of weakness, someone to be hidden away, out of sight, far from the real work of ruling. Daniel had heard the stories, but he wasn't prepared for what he saw when he finally met her. Ariana sat there in her specially designed throne, an elegant but deeply vulnerable figure. Her eyes, though blind, seemed to pierce right through him with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. She was a princess, yes, but she was also so much more. In that first moment, Daniel saw something that the galaxy had failed to recognize. The quiet strength that radiated from Ariana was undeniable. Despite her physical limitations, there was a fire in her, a brilliance that no one seemed to see but him. Unlike others who might have approached her with pity, Daniel didn't see her as someone to be pitied. He saw her as a person, a woman who had endured unimaginable challenges, not just because of her disability, but because of the weight of expectations placed on her by both her kingdom and the galaxy. The others saw only her physical condition, Daniel saw the woman beneath it. He noticed how her mind worked, how sharp and calculating she was, even when confined to her throne. She wasn't just another princess to be paraded around for political advantage. She was someone who had been forced to build walls around her heart to protect herself from a world that refused to accept her for who she truly was. As their conversations began, Daniel started to see more of Ariana's true self. She wasn't just a princess with a crown to wear. She was someone who had been molded by years of isolation and rejection. Her loneliness was not just the result of her condition, but also of the choices that had been made for her by others, choices that dictated who she was allowed to be, who she was allowed to love, and who she was allowed to trust. In a world that valued power and influence, Ariana was often seen as a mere pawn, her worth tied to her title, not her heart. But Daniel wasn't like the others. His connection with her wasn't born out of obligation or political necessity. He didn't seek her because of her royal blood or because of the power her name commanded. He was drawn to something much deeper, a quiet but powerful strength that emanated from her every word, every glance. It was the way she held herself, the way her mind worked, and the way she refused to be defined by the limitations imposed upon her by others. In Ariana, Daniel saw something he had never seen before, a leader who had been hidden away, underestimated by the world, but whose potential was boundless. Over time, Daniel began to realize that Ariana's situation was more than just a matter of physical challenges. Her true struggle was against the world's perception of her. Everyone had written her off because of her disability, but Daniel saw the potential for so much more. He saw a brilliant mind, a sharp wit, and an unbreakable spirit that had been buried under the weight of society's expectations. His heart began to stir in a way he hadn't expected. The more he got to know Ariana, the more he understood that her strength wasn't in spite of her condition, but because of it. She had learned to navigate a world that constantly told her she was less than. She had learned to adapt, to find her power in places where others saw only weakness. What Daniel didn't expect, though, was how much Ariana would change him. As he got closer to her, he found that her strength, her resilience, and her unflinching will to live had a profound impact on him. He had faced battles and conquered many enemies, but Ariana's battle was unlike any he had ever fought. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival, she was fighting against a world that had already decided her fate before she had the chance to speak for herself. In Ariana, Daniel saw a reflection of himself, someone who had learned to survive against the odds, someone who had fought to protect those they loved, and someone who, despite everything, refused to give up. But as much as Daniel was drawn to Ariana, he knew that their relationship could never be easy. The court's rejection of Ariana, the political intrigue surrounding them, and the dangers they faced together all loomed large. They lived in a galaxy that saw power as the ultimate goal, where love was often a secondary concern. Yet, in Ariana, Daniel saw something worth fighting for, a love that transcended all the barriers of society. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing: Ariana wasn't just a princess to be protected. She was a woman to be loved, cherished, and respected. In the end, it wasn't just Ariana who had been changed by Daniel's presence. It was Daniel himself who had learned what true strength really meant, not in physical power, but in the heart, in the spirit, and in the will to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. And in Ariana, he had found not just a leader, but a partner, someone who had the power to change the galaxy, and someone who, for the first time, made him believe in something greater than himself. As the days passed on Lumia Prime, Daniel and Ariana's connection began to deepen in ways neither had anticipated. What started as a professional relationship rooted in political necessity soon transformed into something much more complex, built on trust, respect, and an undeniable bond that neither could ignore. They found themselves drawn to one another not just by duty but by something far more profound, an emotional and intellectual connection that transcended the boundaries of their circumstances. For Daniel, it was a slow realization. Initially, he had come to Lumia Prime to assist the royal family, tasked with ensuring the stability of the kingdom and its alliances. Ariana had seemed like just another political figure, another royal to protect. Yet, from the moment he first laid eyes on her, he felt an inexplicable pull. It wasn't her title or her condition that fascinated him, it was the way she carried herself. Despite the weight of her disability, Ariana radiated a quiet strength, an inner resolve that Daniel couldn't ignore. There was an intelligence behind her words and a depth to her silence that challenged him to look beyond what he had been taught to see. Over time, Daniel began to realize that Ariana's true power lay not in the visible realm, but in her mind and spirit. The more he spoke with her, the more he discovered just how capable she was. Her ability to navigate the complexities of court politics with a mere sense of hearing, her sharp insights into people's motivations, and her unwavering determination to protect her kingdom, all of these things made her an extraordinary leader. Yet, none of this was seen by the outside world. She had been dismissed, rejected, and underestimated. And in many ways, Daniel saw that as a tragedy. Ariana, on the other hand, was no stranger to being misunderstood. For most of her life, she had been seen as a burden, a figurehead with no real power. People spoke to her with deference, but there was always an underlying sense of pity, as if her physical limitations defined who she was. And yet, Ariana had spent years learning to protect herself from the world's judgment, building walls around her heart to shield herself from the constant rejection. She had long ago accepted that love was a distant concept for someone like her. And yet, there was something different about Daniel. Unlike others who approached her with ulterior motives, he didn't see her as a pawn, an obstacle to be overcome, or a project to be fixed. He saw her as a person. A woman. Their conversations began to move from the realm of duty to something more personal, something more human. As they spoke late into the night about their hopes, their fears, and their dreams, Ariana found herself opening up to Daniel in a way she had never allowed herself to with anyone before. She shared the struggles of growing up under the weight of her condition, the isolation that came with being a princess who was often treated as fragile and incapable. In Daniel, she saw a man who didn't pity her. Instead, he respected her. He listened to her, truly listened, and for the first time, Ariana felt like her voice mattered. Daniel, too, began to see Ariana in a new light. At first, he had been hesitant, unsure of how to approach someone in her position. His military background had taught him to focus on the practical, on strategy, on tactics, on surviving. But with Ariana, he learned that there was more to life than survival. There was the joy of understanding, the pleasure of truly knowing another person. He began to see how much he had underestimated her. He had always thought that true strength was something physical, something visible, but Ariana had shown him otherwise. Her strength lay in her ability to keep going, to keep fighting, despite the world's efforts to hold her down. The connection between them began to shift from mutual respect to something deeper. They started to rely on one another in ways that went beyond political necessity. Ariana began to trust Daniel not just as a protector, but as a confidant. She would confide in him her thoughts on the state of the kingdom, her frustrations with the court, and her fears for the future. In return, Daniel found himself sharing his own vulnerabilities, something he rarely did with anyone. He spoke to Ariana about his past, the battles he had fought, the losses he had endured, and the uncertainty that had always lingered in his life. For the first time, he allowed himself to be open with someone, to show his weaknesses without fear of judgment. Their bond grew as they spent more time together, learning each other's rhythms, anticipating each other's thoughts. It wasn't just the physical proximity that brought them closer, it was the shared moments of quiet understanding, the subtle gestures of care. Daniel found himself always looking out for Ariana, not out of duty, but because he genuinely cared for her well-being. And Ariana, for the first time in years, allowed herself to lean on someone, to trust that not everyone would abandon her when things got difficult. She had always felt alone, but with Daniel, she felt seen. But their growing closeness was not without its complications. As their bond deepened, so did the risks they faced. The court, the political system, and even their own people began to notice the growing connection between them. For some, it was a symbol of hope, a sign that the boundaries between species, between royalty and soldier, could be bridged. For others, it was a threat. They saw a princess who was becoming more independent, more capable of challenging the traditional order. They saw a soldier who was growing too close to the crown. Despite the dangers they faced, Daniel and Ariana were undeterred. They knew the risks, but they also knew that their connection was something worth fighting for. The trust they had built, the respect they had earned, could not be easily shattered by the opinions of others. They had already fought their inner battles, and now, together, they would face whatever external challenges came their way. As the days passed and their relationship deepened, Ariana began to believe in something she had long ago abandoned, the possibility of a future not defined by her disability, but by her potential. And for the first time, Daniel saw a future where he was not just a soldier, but a man who had found something more meaningful than duty, a love that transcended all boundaries. In this journey of mutual respect and growing trust, Daniel and Ariana discovered not just the strength to fight against the forces that sought to tear them apart, but also the strength to stand side by side, unbroken, as they forged a path toward a future they both could believe in. The political landscape of Lumia Prime was as fragile as it was complex. In a world governed by power, alliances, and the constant dance of diplomacy, trust was a rare commodity. And for Princess Ariana, trust had always been an elusive thing. The court, full of scheming nobles and political rivals, had never truly accepted her for who she was. To them, she was more a symbol of weakness than a leader, a mere pawn in their endless pursuit of power. Yet, Ariana had never been one to fall in line with expectations. Behind the veils of royal etiquette, she had seen the power plays, the hidden agendas, and the subtle manipulations that governed the palace. In her isolation, she had learned to read the subtext of every conversation, the lies behind every smile. But no one had warned her about the Drachnid Empire. At first, the arrival of Ambassador Krell had been seen as a routine diplomatic mission, one of many to solidify the alliance between Lumia Prime and the neighboring Drachnid Empire. The Drachnids, fierce and formidable, had long been considered an essential ally, and their support could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. Ariana, ever the diplomat, had approached their meetings with a calculated detachment, focusing on the broader goals of the kingdom. However, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something wasn't quite right about Krell. There was a coldness in his eyes, a subtle air of calculation that made her feel uneasy. But for the sake of the kingdom and its future, she had to overlook her doubts and engage with him. From the very beginning, Krell had been different. He was an imposing figure, towering over everyone in the room with his iridescent scaled armor and sharp, reptilian eyes. His every word seemed deliberate, carefully chosen to maintain the facade of cordial diplomacy while concealing deeper ambitions. Ariana had noticed how he never truly addressed her directly, always deferring to her father, King the Lion. It was as if he couldn't bring himself to see her as anything more than a figurehead. Yet, despite his condescension, he maintained an air of courtesy that made it difficult for anyone to question his intentions. For weeks, Daniel had watched the interactions between Ariana and Krell, sensing the undercurrents of tension that Ariana had yet to fully acknowledge. Daniel had always been quick to assess danger, honed by years of military experience, but the subtleties of royal politics were far more complex than anything he had encountered on Earth. He had learned to trust his instincts, and those instincts told him that something was wrong. He noticed how the other court members, those who had previously ignored Ariana, now fawned over Krell, eager to win his favor. There was an uncomfortable shift in the air, a subtle but unmistakable sign that Krell was more than just a diplomat. He was a harbinger of something far darker, and Ariana was at the center of it. The turning point came one evening when, after a seemingly routine meeting, Ariana found herself alone with Daniel, a rare moment of respite from the ever-watchful eyes of the court. Her expression was somber as she relayed a disturbing encounter she had had with Krell. He spoke of alliances, of promises, she said, her voice soft but laced with concern. But there was something in his tone, something I can't place. It's as if he's playing a game I'm not even aware of. Daniel's heart tightened as he listened to her, the weight of the realization dawning on him. He had always been aware of the politics surrounding Ariana, but he had never imagined that Krell's motives might be so insidious. Their fears were confirmed when, late one night, an intercepted transmission revealed Krell's true intentions. Far from seeking peaceful alliances, he had been manipulating the situation all along, playing both sides in an effort to seize control of Lumia Prime's resources. Worse still, he had made a secret deal with the enemies of the Lumian crown, the traitors within the royal court. Krell's ambitions were not just political, they were personal. He had recognized Ariana's unique position as the heir to the throne, and instead of respecting her for what she was, he saw her as a tool to further his own empire's dominance. The Drachnids believed that by exploiting Ariana's royal blood and her access to Lumian technology, they could unlock a power that would grant them control over both the Lumian and human species. This revelation shattered the fragile illusion of safety Ariana had held onto. The court, which had once treated her as a mere figurehead, was now complicit in a grand scheme that threatened everything she had ever known. But the most crushing betrayal came from the heart of her own palace. Lord Veen, one of her most trusted advisors, was found to be the orchestrator of the traitorous alliance between the Drachnids and the Lumian rebels within the court. It was Lord Veen who had secretly fed Krell the information necessary to exploit Ariana's vulnerabilities. It was he who had manipulated Ariana's movements, her decisions, all while pretending to be her ally. The betrayal cut deep. Ariana had trusted Lord Veen, believing him to be one of the few who truly had her best interests at heart. The realization that someone so close to her had been working against her was more than she could bear. Her trust had been shattered, and with it, the foundation of her belief in the loyalty of those around her. She had spent her life surrounded by people who saw her as a tool for political advantage, but this was different. This was betrayal at the most personal level, and it left Ariana questioning everything. In the midst of the betrayal, Daniel's role became even more crucial. With the palace in turmoil and the Drachnid forces closing in, Daniel and Ariana were forced to confront not just the external threats but the internal ones as well. They could no longer trust the court, nor the supposed allies they had relied on. They would have to fight not only for their lives but for the very soul of Lumia Prime. The stakes had never been higher. What had started as a simple diplomatic mission had evolved into a battle for survival, one that would test the limits of their courage, loyalty, and love. As they prepared to face the Drachnids and the traitors within their own ranks, Ariana realized that her struggle was no longer just about defending her kingdom. It was about redefining her place in the world, about standing up against the forces that sought to diminish her. In this fight, she would not be just a princess. She would be a warrior, fighting for herself, for Daniel, and for a future that no one could control. The galaxy, with all its shining stars and vast expanses, was a place of constant shifting allegiances and hidden dangers. Ariana had always known that danger could come from anywhere. As a royal princess, she had been surrounded by political intrigue and subterfuge for most of her life, but nothing had prepared her for what would unfold when the Drachnid Empire, and their devious ambassador, Krell, finally revealed their true intentions. What had begun as a diplomatic mission soon spiraled into a deadly game, and Ariana, for the first time, found herself at the very center of a storm that threatened to destroy everything she had fought for. The first sign that something was wrong came quietly, like a whisper carried on the wind. Ariana had sensed the shift in the atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension, of something building in the shadows. The Drachnids had been eager to ally with Lumia Prime, yet their eagerness felt too calculated, too perfect. Ariana had brushed aside her doubts, at first convincing herself that her instincts were simply a result of years spent in the royal court, surrounded by manipulative politicians. But Daniel, ever the perceptive soldier, had begun to notice things that Ariana hadn't fully understood. He was watching Krell more closely, sensing the danger even when it was hidden beneath layers of politeness and charm. It wasn't until late one evening, after a seemingly routine meeting with the Drachnids, that everything fell apart. Ariana, exhausted but determined, retired to her chambers to rest, only to be roused moments later by a loud, shrill alarm echoing through the palace. Her heart skipped a beat as her mind raced to understand what was happening. The royal palace was under attack. Krell, the man who had professed friendship and alliance, had been playing them all along. The attack had been carefully planned, timed to coincide with a moment of perceived weakness. The Drachnid forces, lurking in the shadows, had launched a sudden, unexpected strike on Lumia Prime's capital. But this was no random act of aggression. It was a calculated betrayal. The Drachnids, with their vast technological power and military strength, had already infiltrated key points within the palace. Ariana and Daniel had been blindsided, unable to prevent the fall of the kingdom's defenses. The palace, once a symbol of power and security, quickly became a battlefield. Ariana's hover throne, once a tool for her mobility and royal status, became a lifeline, navigating the corridors in an attempt to find safety. But the halls of the palace were no longer safe. The royal guards, once loyal, had been compromised. Traitors lurked in the shadows, working with the Drachnids to ensure that Ariana and Daniel were trapped. As the sounds of battle echoed in the distance, the truth of Krell's plan became horrifyingly clear. Krell's intentions were never about diplomacy. His mission was simple: take Ariana and use her as a pawn to seize control of Lumia Prime. The Drachnid Empire had long desired to unlock the unique power hidden within the Lumian royal bloodline. Ariana's position as heir to the throne, and her connection to the ancient technologies of Lumia Prime, made her the perfect key to their ambitions. Krell, ever the manipulator, had known this from the start. His charm, his carefully calculated words, had been nothing more than a smokescreen, hiding his true objective. Ariana's royal blood was invaluable, and Krell was determined to claim it for his empire, no matter the cost. As Ariana and Daniel fought their way through the palace, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The battle was not just against the Drachnids, it was against the very system that had allowed them to infiltrate the palace in the first place. Betrayal ran deeper than just Krell's actions, it was embedded within the royal court itself. Their enemies were not only those from the outside, but those from within the kingdom, who had turned their backs on the Lumian throne in exchange for power, wealth, and influence. The very people Ariana had once considered allies were now working against her, selling their loyalty for a future that would leave her vulnerable and discarded. As the chaos unfolded around them, Daniel and Ariana found themselves facing a decision they had never anticipated. They could fight, but their chances of survival seemed slim. The palace was lost. The Drachnids were too strong, and the traitors within the court were too deeply entrenched. But it was in this moment of darkness that Ariana's true strength emerged. No longer willing to be a pawn, no longer willing to let her kingdom fall to Krell and his forces, Ariana chose to fight back. She activated her hover throne's hidden systems, unlocking a new level of power that neither she nor anyone else had anticipated. The Lumian technology, which had long been dormant within her throne, began to hum with life. Ariana's connection to it deepened, and with it came an overwhelming surge of energy. She felt the crystals around her, the very lifeblood of Lumia Prime, resonating with her, responding to her will. The same technology that had once been used to trap her now became the weapon that would protect her and her people. In an instant, the throne became more than just a tool, it became a force of nature, a shield against the Drachnid onslaught. Daniel, ever the protector, fought by her side, pushing back against the Drachnid forces with all his strength. But it was Ariana's power that turned the tide of the battle. The Drachnid forces, once confident in their superiority, found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer force of Ariana's newfound abilities. She commanded the crystals, directing them to form barriers of light that shielded them from attack, while blasting the enemy with beams of energy that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the palace. But even as the battle raged, Ariana knew that this victory was only temporary. Krell, though momentarily defeated, would not stop. His betrayal had set the stage for something far darker, something that would force Ariana and Daniel to face even greater dangers. The Drachnids were not just fighting for control, they were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. And Ariana, once the pawn in their game, had become the key to their defeat. The ambush was more than just an attack on Lumia Prime. It was a turning point in Ariana's journey. In the face of betrayal, she had found her strength. The Drachnids had underestimated her, and in doing so, had awakened a power they could never control. But as the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, one question remained: would this be enough to stop Krell and his empire, or had Ariana and Daniel just entered a war that would change the fate of the entire galaxy? In the midst of the chaos, when it seemed that the galaxy's forces were closing in and the very walls of Lumia Prime would crumble, Ariana's life began to shift in ways that neither she nor anyone else could have ever predicted. It wasn't just the physical battles they were fighting now, it was a battle for the soul, a fight for what Ariana had always believed to be impossible, the unlocking of her true potential. For years, she had been defined by her physical limitations, trapped in a body that seemed to speak louder than her mind or her spirit ever could. But in the moment of greatest peril, when everything was at risk, Ariana discovered a power within herself, a power that had been dormant for so long, waiting for the right moment to awaken. It began with a simple, yet profound, realization. In the heat of battle, surrounded by the shattering sounds of conflict and the fear of loss, Ariana felt something shift within her. For the first time, she stopped thinking of herself as the paralyzed princess, the fragile heir to the throne. She wasn't merely the woman who had spent her life watching the world from her throne, unable to join in the action, unable to be the one to lead her people in times of crisis. She was more than that. She was a part of this world, a living, breathing force with the ability to change it. As the battle raged on, she felt the energy of the Lumian crystals, the very core of her kingdom, pulsating within her. They had always been a part of her, a silent presence beneath her throne. But now, as the weight of the moment pressed down on her, the connection deepened. It was as if the crystals responded not just to her commands, but to her emotions, her heart. In that moment, Ariana realized that the key to unlocking her power was not just in her intellect, nor in the strength of the technology that had always defined her role as a royal. The true power lay in the love she had for her people, for her kingdom, and for the man who stood by her side, Daniel. It was love that had sustained her through years of loneliness, love that had given her the courage to face the world when everyone else saw only weakness. And it was love that now unlocked a new level of strength. Ariana's bond with Daniel had been forged over time, growing from respect and trust into something far more profound. In him, she had found someone who truly saw her not as a princess to be protected, not as a symbol of royalty, but as a woman, a partner, and a force in her own right. Their connection had been built on understanding, on the quiet moments shared between them when words were no longer needed. They had learned each other's rhythms, understood each other's silences. They had come to rely on one another not just for survival, but for the kind of deep connection that transcends even the gravest of threats. As the battle unfolded, Daniel stood by her side, offering his strength, his protection. But Ariana, in her newfound clarity, saw beyond his role as her protector. She realized that their bond was not just one of duty or survival, it was a partnership, a union that defied all the expectations placed upon them. It was in this realization that Ariana's power truly unlocked. She had always believed that she was helpless, that her body's limitations defined her. But she now understood that her power came from within, her love, her strength, her connection to those she cared for. The moment she embraced this truth, a surge of energy coursed through her. The Lumian crystals, which had once merely served as her throne's tool for mobility, now responded to her every thought, every emotion. They became an extension of her will, reacting to her desires to protect Daniel, to protect Lumia Prime. The energy that had always been there, hidden beneath layers of technology, now surged to the surface, as if the very essence of Lumia Prime's power had recognized her as its true leader. Ariana's hover throne, once a symbol of her fragility, now became a weapon, a force of pure energy that radiated with strength and purpose. The crystals responded to her commands as if they were an extension of her own body, forming barriers to shield them from the Drachnid onslaught, sending waves of energy that knocked enemies off their feet. It wasn't just her throne that had awakened, it was her entire being. The power within her had been there all along, waiting for the moment she could embrace it fully. And that moment had arrived. But as Ariana stood at the center of this newfound power, she wasn't just fighting to protect herself. She was fighting for those she loved, for the kingdom that had rejected her, and for a future where the limits imposed upon her by her body, by society, no longer defined her. She was no longer the princess in the shadows of her palace, she was a force in the world, someone who would stand tall and face whatever came her way. In that moment, as the battle raged around her, Daniel looked at Ariana not as the woman he had once vowed to protect, but as the woman who had become his equal, his partner. He saw in her not just the strength of a warrior, but the depth of someone who had been fighting her entire life not just for survival, but for a chance to be seen, to be understood, and to be loved. And in that love, Ariana had found the strength to rise above her limitations, to unlock a power that had been within her all along. As the battle drew to a close, and the Drachnids were driven back, Ariana stood victorious, but she knew that this was only the beginning. Her awakening had not only changed the course of the battle, it had changed the course of her life. She was no longer a passive player in the game of politics and power. She had become a force to be reckoned with, not because of her physical strength, but because of the love that had awakened her spirit and allowed her to see her true potential. In that moment, Ariana knew that the true power of love was not just in its ability to heal or protect, it was in its ability to transform, to awaken the strength we didn't know we had, and to create the kind of bond that could reshape the very fabric of the universe. And with Daniel by her side, Ariana was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together, they could conquer anything. The battle between the Drachnid forces and the defenders of Lumia Prime had reached a fever pitch. The palace was in ruins, the once grand hallways now echoing with the clash of metal and the hum of energy weapons. Amidst the chaos, Ariana stood resolute at the center of the conflict, her powers unlocked in a surge of raw energy that had never been seen before. Her throne, once a symbol of her limitations, had transformed into an instrument of her newfound strength, and with it, she had turned the tide of the battle. But the Drachnids, relentless and cunning, had more tricks up their sleeves. And in the face of an overwhelming force, Ariana knew that victory would come at a great cost. As she fought alongside Daniel, her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and fear. The energy she commanded flowed like a torrent, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the moment of final reckoning was approaching. They had fought together, grown together, but Ariana knew that the true test was yet to come. She had found a strength within herself that she had never thought possible, but this battle was unlike any other. There was still one threat they couldn't foresee, one enemy who had come to claim everything Ariana had worked so hard to protect. Krell, the Drachnid ambassador, had never truly been defeated. While Ariana and Daniel focused on pushing back his forces, Krell had been quietly preparing for his final move. As the battle raged on, a sudden surge of power caught Ariana off guard. She turned to find Krell standing at the heart of the battlefield, his energy readings spiking. It was clear that he had unleashed something far more dangerous than Ariana had anticipated, an energy weapon capable of rendering her powers useless. With a malevolent grin, Krell aimed the weapon at her, intending to strike her down and take Lumia Prime for himself. In that moment, Ariana felt a coldness in her chest. She knew that her powers, though formidable, were not enough to stop Krell's weapon. It was too late to act, too late to shield herself. She closed her eyes, bracing for the inevitable strike. But then, in an instant, Daniel was there. He pushed her out of the line of fire without hesitation, his body taking the full brunt of the blast meant for her. Ariana's scream rang out in the chaos of battle as she watched Daniel fall, his armor pierced by the raw force of the energy weapon. Time seemed to slow as the world around her dissolved into a blur of movement and sound. Daniel, the man who had stood by her side through everything, who had fought not just for survival but for the love they had found, was now crumpled on the ground, blood pooling around him. Daniel had always been the protector, the one who had promised to fight for her no matter the cost. But now, as he lay in her arms, his breath shallow and labored, Ariana realized that this was the ultimate sacrifice. He had given everything to save her, to ensure that she would live, to ensure that Lumia Prime would stand a chance. The weight of his sacrifice pressed down on her, heavier than any burden she had ever borne. Tears welled up in Ariana's eyes as she cradled Daniel's face, her fingers trembling as she brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. She had never imagined that it would come to this. They had come so far together, had fought side by side, and yet now, in this moment, she was facing the possibility of losing him. His sacrifice had given her the chance to continue fighting, but at what cost? As she held him, something stirred within her, a deep, burning need to do whatever it took to save him. Her powers surged once more, the connection to the Lumion crystals pulsing in time with her heart. She reached out, channeling everything she had into a healing wave that enveloped Daniel's body. She could feel his life force flickering, struggling to hold on, but she refused to give up. Ariana's mind raced as she focused all her energy on him, pouring every ounce of love, of determination, into healing him. She could feel the crystals, the very essence of Lumia Prime, responding to her call. The energy, once a tool for destruction, now became a conduit for life. In that moment, Ariana realized that the power she had unlocked was not just about fighting or defeating enemies. It was about love, about the strength that comes from caring for someone so deeply that you would sacrifice everything to protect them. It was this love that had sustained her through the years of rejection, through the battles, and through the trials that had shaped her. It was this love that now gave her the strength to fight for Daniel's life. But even as she poured everything into him, Ariana knew that the outcome was uncertain. She could feel the weight of her power, and yet, as the seconds stretched on, she couldn't be sure if it would be enough. Daniel's body was bruised, battered, and broken from the blast, and despite her best efforts, his pulse remained faint. She clung to him, refusing to let go, hoping against hope that somehow, her love for him would be enough. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Daniel's fingers twitched. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but enough to send a rush of relief flooding through Ariana's chest. He was alive. He had made it. But the toll of the sacrifice weighed heavily on both of them. Ariana knew that the battle was far from over, and the cost of their victory had been immense. Daniel's sacrifice had given her the strength to carry on, but now it was up to her to finish what they had started. As the battle raged on around them, Ariana made a vow to herself, to Daniel, and to Lumia Prime. She would not let his sacrifice be in vain. The Drachnid forces, Krell, and the traitors within the palace would not break her. She would carry the weight of their love, their shared struggle, into the final confrontation and beyond. Daniel's heroism had ignited a fire in Ariana's soul, a fire that would not be extinguished until Lumia Prime was free and their love, tested by fire and sacrifice, was allowed to flourish. No matter what came next, she would honor his sacrifice by fighting with everything she had. She was no longer just the princess in a throne room. She was a leader, a warrior, and the protector of everything Daniel had fought for. As the dust of the battle settled, and the forces of the Drachnid Empire were pushed back, Ariana and Daniel found themselves standing on the precipice of a new world, a world where the future of Lumia Prime, and indeed the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. The Drachnids had been defeated, for now, but Ariana knew deep in her heart that the true war was only just beginning. The ambush, the betrayal, and the sacrifice they had endured had only uncovered a fragment of the darkness that lingered beneath the surface. A new threat, far more insidious and complex than they had imagined, was about to reveal itself. The palace, once a symbol of unity and strength, was now a crumbling ruin. The walls that had stood for centuries seemed to hold no answers, no comfort for those who had lost so much. As Ariana and Daniel stood together, they tried to make sense of what had transpired, but the deeper questions loomed large in their minds. Who had truly been behind the Drachnid attack? Why had Krell come to Lumia Prime with such a meticulously calculated plan to manipulate and control not just Ariana, but the very future of her people? But the revelation came slowly, like the dawn creeping over a darkened sky. The deeper Ariana dug into the shattered fragments of her kingdom, the more unsettling truths she uncovered. It wasn't just Krell who had manipulated events, it was a far-reaching network of conspirators, some of them from within her very court. The Drachnids had only been the pawns, the tools used to advance a greater, more dangerous agenda. Someone, or something, was orchestrating this conspiracy from the shadows, and Ariana realized with a growing sense of dread that she was not only fighting for her life, but for the survival of her entire kingdom. The revelation hit her with a force she hadn't been prepared for. It was Lord Veen, her trusted advisor, the man who had always been by her side, who had now revealed himself to be the true mastermind behind the conspiracy. It was he who had been feeding information to Krell, who had plotted the downfall of the Lumian royal family, and who had manipulated Ariana's every move to further his own ambitions. The realization that someone so close to her had betrayed her in such a profound way was a blow that cut deeper than any physical wound. Ariana had trusted Lord Veen, confided in him, and had even come to rely on his counsel. He had been her anchor, her steady presence in a world that was often overwhelming. Now, all of that trust had been shattered. Daniel, ever the soldier, had seen the signs earlier than Ariana. He had been the one to notice the subtle shifts in Lord Veen's behavior, the small inconsistencies in his actions that, at first, had seemed harmless. But Daniel's instincts told him that something wasn't right. He had questioned Lord Veen's loyalty, and now, seeing the full extent of the betrayal, he understood just how dangerous their enemies truly were. Lord Veen's betrayal wasn't just a political move, it was personal. He had taken advantage of Ariana's trust, her vulnerability, and her love for her kingdom, and used it against her to achieve his own desires. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, Ariana realized that the Drachnid threat was only one piece of the puzzle. The greater danger lay within her own people, within her own palace. The court, the very institution that was supposed to protect her, was now infected with corruption. And yet, Ariana couldn't shake the overwhelming feeling that something more sinister was at play, something that reached far beyond the borders of Lumia Prime. The true enemy was still out there, waiting in the shadows. It was a force that had been pulling the strings all along, using Lord Veen and the Drachnids as mere tools to destabilize Lumia Prime and its allies. But Ariana couldn't yet see the full picture. All she knew was that the threat was not one that could be easily vanquished with a single battle. The enemy they were facing wasn't just a foreign power, it was something more elusive, more pervasive. It was a force that had infiltrated every level of her kingdom, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This realization was a turning point for Ariana. No longer could she afford to play by the rules of diplomacy and courtly politics. No longer could she rely on the comfort of her throne and the security of her position. To survive, to protect the people she loved, she would have to become something more than a princess. She would have to become a leader in the truest sense of the word, someone willing to face the darkness head-on, no matter where it came from or how deeply it had taken root. And so, Ariana and Daniel, now bound not just by love but by a shared sense of purpose, began to formulate their next move. The first step was to root out the traitors within the court, to expose those who had been working with Lord Veen to undermine the kingdom from within. But that was only the beginning. The greater challenge was uncovering the hidden force that had orchestrated this web of deception. The tension between them grew as they faced the magnitude of the task ahead. Ariana knew that every move they made would be watched, every decision scrutinized. The path ahead was fraught with danger, and they would not be able to trust anyone, no one, except for each other. But in this dark hour, Ariana found something she hadn't known she needed, the unshakable knowledge that love, even in its most vulnerable form, could be the greatest weapon she possessed. It was this love that had already helped her unlock the power within herself. And it would be this love that would guide her through the darkness that lay ahead. As the galaxy watched, as the Drachnids regrouped and the traitors within her court whispered their dark plans, Ariana knew that the fight was far from over. But with Daniel by her side, and the strength of her love and resolve as her foundation, she would face whatever came next. No matter how powerful the forces against her, no matter how deep the conspiracy ran, Ariana would not be defeated. This revelation, this new threat, would be met head-on. The battle was far from won, but Ariana was no longer the princess hiding behind her throne. She was a leader, a warrior, and she would stop at nothing to protect the future of Lumia Prime. For years, Ariana had walked the halls of Lumia Prime's royal palace, her every step shadowed by the whispered intrigues of the court. The palace, once a symbol of unity and strength, had always felt more like a gilded cage. The opulence, the grandeur, all masked a bitter reality. She had learned early on that trust was a rare commodity in the court. Most people were there to further their own ambitions, to climb higher on the ladder of power. In the eyes of the nobles, Ariana had been nothing more than a trophy, an heir to be used to solidify alliances and cement their hold on the throne. What they never saw, what they never understood, was the woman she had become, sharp, observant, and acutely aware of the web of politics that ensnared her people. Ariana's mind was always working, always calculating. She had seen the subtle shifts in the court over the years, how certain individuals who once treated her with disdain were now courting her favor. She had been trained to read the small gestures, the pauses in conversation, the way power shifted hands behind closed doors. But nothing had prepared her for the depth of the betrayal that was unfolding right beneath her nose. It wasn't just the Drachnid Empire that had been plotting her downfall, it was her own people. The court had become a breeding ground for betrayal, and the worst part was that it was being orchestrated by someone she had trusted, someone she had relied on for years. The revelation came slowly, like the pieces of a puzzle coming together, one by one. Ariana had suspected for a while that the Drachnids' interest in her kingdom was more than just diplomatic. The ambassador Krell's charm had been too smooth, too perfect. He had ingratiated himself with her father, King the Lion, and had spent countless hours speaking with the nobles of Lumia Prime, always careful to frame his words in ways that sounded beneficial to everyone. But Ariana had seen through the facade. She had known, deep down, that Krell wasn't just here to form an alliance. His eyes, cold and calculating, had always given him away. He was here for something else. And that something was her. It was when Ariana began to investigate the details of the Drachnid presence in the palace that she stumbled upon the truth. Hidden in the records, tucked away in dusty corners of the royal archives, was a series of documents that pointed to a secret pact, an alliance between the Drachnid Empire and some of her closest allies within the court. These were not mere agreements of peace or trade, they were detailed arrangements that set the stage for a coup takeover of Lumia Prime, led by the very people who were supposed to protect her. The names on the documents were all too familiar: Lord Veen, her trusted advisor, the man she had confided in more times than she could count; Lady Alara, a member of the Royal Council who had long been a friend to her family, and even some of the high-ranking generals who had pledged their loyalty to the throne. All of them had been in secret communication with Krell, sharing information, offering their support for the Drachnid plans, and even facilitating the infiltration of key positions within the palace. They had made promises to the Drachnids, promises of power, of wealth, and of a new order that would elevate them above the rest of the kingdom. And at the center of it all was Ariana herself. The betrayal was so deep, so pervasive, that it left Ariana reeling. She had always known that trust was a fragile thing, but to have so many of her closest allies turn against her, to have them collude with an outside force to usurp her kingdom, this was a wound that cut deeper than any physical blow ever could. She had been living under the illusion that she was the one in control, that her power and her bloodline could keep her safe. But in truth, she had been a pawn in a game she hadn't even realized was being played. As Ariana pieced the puzzle together, her anger began to bubble to the surface. The court had been hiding in plain sight, betraying her and her father for their own selfish gain. They had used her, manipulated her, and in some cases, even abused the trust she had placed in them. But what was worse was the realization that they had underestimated her. They had thought she was weak, a mere figurehead, someone they could control. But Ariana had never been just a princess. She was a fighter, a strategist, and now she was more determined than ever to take back control of her kingdom. She confronted Lord Veen in a private meeting, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked him in the eye. The man who had been her advisor, her confidant, now stood before her as a traitor. His face was a mask of calm, but Ariana could see the faintest twitch in his eye, the subtle signs of guilt that he thought he had hidden so well. She laid the documents before him, watching as his expression faltered. For a moment, it was as if the air between them thickened, and Ariana could see the weight of his treachery sinking in. "How long?" Ariana asked, her voice steady, but her heart heavy with the weight of his betrayal. "How long have you been working with the Drachnids?" Lord Veen's mask cracked, and for the first time, Ariana saw the true man behind the facade. He had always been careful to stay out of her direct line of sight, always the shadow, never the one in the spotlight. But now, in this moment of reckoning, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. "Long enough," he replied, his voice cold, stripped of the warmth it once held. Ariana's heart tightened as she looked at the man who had betrayed her so completely. She had trusted him. She had relied on him for counsel and support. And now, she was left with nothing but the bitter truth of his duplicity. The revelation of the court's secret alliance with the Drachnids was more than just a political disaster, it was a personal betrayal that would shape the course of Ariana's journey. No longer could she trust anyone in the palace, not even those who had once been her most loyal allies. The kingdom she had inherited, the kingdom she had loved, was now at the mercy of those who sought to destroy it for their own gain. But even in the face of such deep betrayal, Ariana was resolute. She would not allow her people, her kingdom, to fall into the hands of traitors and invaders. She would fight for Lumia Prime not just as a princess, but as a leader who would stand up against the forces that sought to destroy everything she had worked for. The betrayal had revealed the depth of her enemy's ambitions, but it had also shown her the power she held within herself. Now, it was time for Ariana to rise and take back what was hers no matter the cost. The battlefield had shifted, and in the aftermath of betrayal and struggle, Ariana found herself standing at the crossroads of an impossible choice. The court had been compromised, her most trusted allies had turned their backs, and the kingdom of Lumia Prime was on the verge of collapse. The Drachnids, once thought to be her greatest enemy, were no longer just a threat from outside her borders, they had now embedded themselves deep within the heart of her palace. The Drachnid ambassador, Krell, had been a tool in a much larger scheme, one that had manipulated her, her father, and her kingdom for his own ends. Yet, as Ariana stood in the ruins of her once mighty palace, something unexpected began to take shape in her mind, a dangerous, forbidden thought that challenged everything she had known. If she was to reclaim Lumia Prime, if she was to drive back the Drachnid forces and restore her kingdom, she would have to consider an alliance with those she once considered enemies. It was a prospect that filled her with unease, a prospect that seemed almost traitorous, but the more Ariana weighed her options, the more she realized that there was no other choice. The Drachnid Empire had been a constant shadow over Lumia Prime, their desire for power and control never far from the surface. But Ariana's confrontation with Krell had revealed the truth: the Drachnids were not a singular threat. They were the tip of an iceberg, part of a far-reaching conspiracy that stretched beyond her palace walls. But what if, instead of seeing the Drachnid forces as a single enemy, she could turn them into a fractured faction? What if there were other Drachnid factions, those who were just as disillusioned with Krell's ambitions as she was? It was a thought that seemed reckless, even absurd. But Ariana had spent her life navigating the complexities of royal politics and court intrigue. She knew how to read people, how to sense when things weren't as they appeared. And in the depths of her desperation, she began to remember something from her earlier encounters with the Drachnids: a subtle shift in the demeanor of some of their high-ranking officers, the quiet murmurs that hinted at dissent within their ranks. Not all Drachnid leaders were loyal to Krell. Not all shared his vision of domination. Ariana knew that if she was to turn the tide, she would need to find a way to reach these dissenters, to form an alliance with those who had nothing to gain from Krell's machinations. This was where the real danger lay, seeking help from the very enemies who had once been hell-bent on her destruction. But Ariana was no stranger to the high-stakes gamble of alliances. She had learned long ago that in a world of shifting loyalties and fractured allegiances, survival sometimes meant taking risks no one else dared to take. It meant aligning with those who had been her adversaries, if it meant survival for her people. The Drachnid Empire's internal divisions could be her key to victory if she could find the right faction to ally with, one that opposed Krell and his ruthless plans. Ariana and Daniel, together, set out on a covert mission to make contact with the Drachnid faction that had quietly opposed Krell for years. The journey was perilous. They had to navigate the ruins of their own kingdom, avoiding the remaining Drachnid forces loyal to Krell, all while making their way to the outskirts of Lumia Prime's borders. Here, beyond the reach of the palace, Ariana hoped to find the Drachnid dissidents. She had heard rumors of the ones who shared her vision of a more peaceful, more equitable future, one where the Drachnids were not bent on conquering and controlling but were seeking a new path. When they finally arrived at the secret meeting place, a secluded chamber hidden beneath the crumbled ruins of a forgotten fortress, Ariana felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. The Drachnid faction she sought was led by General Kale, a figure whose reputation as a warrior was rivaled only by his disdain for Krell's tyrannical rule. Kale had been on the fringes of the Drachnid Empire for years, biding his time, watching as Krell's power grew unchecked. Kale and his followers believed that the Drachnid Empire needed to evolve, that peace and cooperation with other species, like the Lumians, was the only way forward. But they had been silenced by Krell's regime until now. Ariana and Daniel were led into the chamber where General Kale awaited them. The atmosphere was thick with tension, as if the air itself knew the gravity of the meeting. Kale, towering and imposing, regarded Ariana with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. His eyes, dark and intelligent, flicked over her as he spoke, his voice low and measured. "You come to me in the midst of chaos," he said, his tone laced with both suspicion and intrigue. "What makes you think I would trust you? You are the heir to the throne that Krell seeks to destroy. What could you possibly offer me that would make me betray my own kind?" Ariana stood tall, despite the weight of her emotions pressing down on her. She had walked into many negotiations before, but this one felt different. "I offer you an end to the tyranny," she said, her voice steady and unyielding. "Krell's vision for the Drachnid Empire is one of domination and destruction. It is a vision that will only lead to more suffering for both our peoples. But together, we can stop him. We can create a future where both Lumians and Drachnids can live in peace, where power is not measured by fear but by cooperation." Kale studied her for a long moment, as though weighing her words, testing her resolve. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "And what would you have me do? The Drachnid Empire is vast, and Krell's supporters are legion. I cannot simply turn against him without risking everything I built." Ariana's eyes locked onto his, her gaze unwavering. "You risk everything if you stay silent," she said. "Krell will destroy the Drachnids from within, just as he plans to destroy Lumia Prime. I know you, General Kale. You have no loyalty to a tyrant. Help me, and I will help you. Together, we can create a new future." For a long, tense moment, silence enveloped the room. Finally, Kale nodded, his decision made. "You are right," he said. "Krell is a cancer to our people. I will join you. But know this: there is no turning back. Once we ally, we fight together, or we fall together." With that, the Forbidden Alliance was forged. Ariana, once the leader of a kingdom isolated by betrayal and surrounded by enemies, had now allied herself with a faction of those she once considered enemies. In this moment, Ariana knew that there was no going back. The path ahead would be fraught with danger, but it was the only path left. She had made her choice. The Drachnids had been her enemies, but now, they would become her allies, and together, they would fight for the future of Lumia Prime. The moment of reckoning had arrived. After weeks of strategic maneuvering, tense alliances, and the quiet buildup of forces, Ariana stood on the precipice of the final battle. Lumia Prime, the heart of her kingdom, was at risk of being torn apart not just by external enemies, but by those who had once been her closest allies. The Drachnid Empire, led by Krell and his loyalists, had not only infiltrated her court but had also deeply manipulated her people. Yet, as dark as the past had been, the future held even darker threats that only Ariana, with the help of her newfound Drachnid allies, could confront. Her heart beat heavily in her chest as she stood at the edge of the battlefield, where her forces and those of the Drachnid dissidents were poised to clash with Krell's army. The sun hung low in the sky, casting an eerie red light over the land, a portent, perhaps, of the great sacrifice and the bloodshed that would soon follow. Ariana had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, the weight of the decision to fight felt heavier than she could have imagined. She wasn't just fighting for her kingdom, nor for her survival. She was fighting for the future, a future where the mistakes of the past, the betrayals and wars, could be washed away by a new dawn of hope and cooperation. It was a future that depended on her ability to lead, to inspire, and to hold true to the values she had learned during her time in the palace: courage, loyalty, and the unshakable belief that love could change the course of history. The battlefield stretched before her, the air thick with the promise of violence. It was here that the final confrontation would unfold, the clash between two vastly different visions for the future of the galaxy. On one side stood Ariana, with her diverse coalition of Lumian soldiers and the Drachnid dissidents who had pledged to fight for her. On the other side was Krell, a man driven by a vision of power, control, and fear, determined to crush any who stood in his way. His forces, made up of elite Drachnid warriors and traitorous elements within her own court, were formidable, but Ariana's resolve was stronger. Daniel, who had been by her side through it all, stood close, his presence grounding her. In their shared silence, words were unnecessary. Their bond had been tested time and time again, but it was in this final moment that Ariana realized the depth of what they had built together. This was more than a partnership of convenience, more than a fleeting alliance of necessity. It was a love forged in the fires of hardship, one that transcended all boundaries, whether those of species, class, or duty. Together, they had learned the true meaning of sacrifice and loyalty. And now, together, they would face Krell and the forces that sought to destroy them. The sound of war drums echoed across the land, signaling the start of the final battle. Ariana stood tall, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword, her heart steeled for what was to come. She had spent years being underestimated, seen as a figurehead, a helpless princess trapped in a palace. But today, she was no longer that woman. She was a leader, a warrior, and the future of her kingdom depended on the choices she made in these next few moments. The first wave of Krell's forces surged forward, but Ariana and her allies were ready. The battle raged with intensity, the sound of clashing weapons and the roar of energy blasts filling the air. Ariana fought with a fierceness that surprised even her. She had never considered herself a warrior, at least not in the traditional sense. But with her newfound connection to the Lumian crystals, her powers had evolved in ways she hadn't fully understood until now. She moved with purpose, channeling the energy of Lumia Prime itself, her sword cutting through the enemy ranks with a precision she had never known. The power of the crystals thrummed through her veins, guiding her every move, amplifying her strength and speed. As the battle wore on, Ariana felt the weight of the stakes. This was no longer just a fight for her throne, it was a fight for her people, for her kingdom's future. But as the chaos unfolded around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was still ahead. Krell had been relentless, but there was something deeper at play. The Drachnid forces that had once been her enemy were now her allies, yet there was a lingering tension in the air. The final confrontation wasn't just with Krell, it was with everything that had brought them here, everything that had led to this war. The moment of truth came when Ariana faced Krell on the battlefield, their eyes locking for the first time since the betrayal had been exposed. He stood before her, towering and unyielding, his power evident in every step he took. His army was faltering, but his belief in his victory was unwavering. "You think you can defeat me?" Krell's voice was a low growl, dripping with disdain. "You have no idea what you're up against, princess. This is more than just a battle for a throne. This is a battle for the future, for control of the galaxy itself. And I will not be stopped." Ariana's gaze was steady, her voice calm but resolute. "The future is not yours to control, Krell. You will never rule this kingdom, and you will never have power over my people again. This ends now." With those words, the battle reached its climax. Ariana and Krell clashed with a force that shook the earth beneath their feet. Each strike, each parry, echoed the years of tension, the years of betrayal, and the years of sacrifice. Ariana could feel every ounce of her strength being pushed to its limits, but she knew she could not falter. This was the moment where everything she had fought for would either be realized or lost forever. The fate of Lumia Prime was in her hands. As the battle raged on, Ariana tapped into the deepest reserves of her power. She reached out to the Lumian crystals, drawing upon their ancient energy, unleashing a wave of force so powerful that it threw Krell off balance. In that moment of weakness, Ariana struck, her blade slicing through his defenses, severing the connection between him and the power he had tried to wield. Krell fell, his arrogance shattered, and his empire crumbled with him. But even as the dust settled and the battlefield grew silent, Ariana knew that this victory was bittersweet. The cost had been high. She had lost friends, allies, and part of herself in this war. But through the fire of battle, she had emerged stronger, more capable, and more determined than ever to lead her people into a new era of peace. The final confrontation was not just about defeating Krell, it was about embracing the future. Ariana had fought for her kingdom, but more importantly, she had fought for a future where unity, love, and sacrifice would define the path forward. The battle was over, but the journey had just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Lumia Prime in ruins. The ground was littered with the remains of fallen soldiers, the once thriving capital now a shadow of its former self. The skies, once filled with the hum of energy blasts and the chaos of war, were now eerily silent, heavy with the weight of the devastation. The streets, which had witnessed both triumph and tragedy, were now quiet, almost mournful. Yet, amidst the desolation, there was something else, the unmistakable presence of change. Ariana stood at the edge of the battlefield, her eyes sweeping across the city that had been the heart of her kingdom. The air, still thick with the dust of battle, seemed to pulse with a strange new energy. It was the energy of something beginning to heal, something fragile but hopeful. She had fought for this moment, the moment when her people could begin to rebuild, when they could emerge from the darkness of betrayal and war. But as she stood there, watching the remnants of the battle, she couldn't shake the feeling that the fight wasn't truly over. The scars of the conflict ran deep, and healing would not come easily. The battle for Lumia Prime had been won, but the battle for its future had just begun. Beside her, Daniel stood in quiet reflection, his presence a steadying force. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort, a reminder that she was not alone. Together, they had faced the worst the galaxy had to offer, and together, they had emerged victorious. But the victory was bittersweet. The cost of their struggle had been immense. They had lost so much friends, allies, and pieces of themselves that could never be reclaimed. Yet, despite the weight of the sacrifices, Ariana couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a fragile hope, born not from the aftermath of the battle itself, but from the potential that lay ahead. The defeat of Krell had brought an end to the immediate threat, but it had also left a void. The Drachnid Empire, fractured and broken, was now in disarray. Its once mighty forces were scattered, its leadership shattered. The void left by Krell's downfall could easily be filled by another power-hungry individual, someone who might seek to rebuild the empire through force and conquest. Ariana knew that the real challenge wasn't simply defeating one man, it was ensuring that Lumia Prime would never again fall prey to the darkness of ambition and corruption. As she turned away from the battlefield, Ariana's thoughts turned inward. She had always been defined by her title, by her position as princess, heir to the throne, and the symbol of her kingdom's power. But now, as the weight of the crown shifted on her head, she realized that she had become something more. She had become a leader, not because of the throne she inherited, but because of the choices she had made, the sacrifices she had endured, and the love that had guided her every step. Leadership was no longer about command or control, it was about the people she led, the trust they placed in her, and the future they could build together. The people of Lumia Prime had suffered greatly, but they had also shown remarkable resilience. The remnants of Krell's forces were scattered, and the traitors within the court were exposed. Ariana's next task was clear, to rebuild not just her kingdom, but its very foundation. She had to rebuild trust that had been shattered by the betrayal within her own ranks, trust that had been fractured by the years of manipulation and deceit. The road ahead would be long, and there would be those who sought to undermine her at every turn. But Ariana knew she was no longer the helpless princess locked in a palace of secrets. She was a woman, a leader, and the future of her people rested in her hands. Her first act as queen would be to gather the remnants of the royal council, to restore order within the court, and to ensure that those who had betrayed her would face justice. But justice alone would not heal the wounds of the kingdom. She would need to offer something more, something that would rebuild not only the infrastructure of Lumia Prime but also the hearts of its people. A new era of peace and cooperation would have to be forged, one that honored the sacrifices made and the lessons learned. Ariana knew that to achieve this, she would have to find a way to unite the factions within her kingdom, both the loyalists and those who had once fought against her. Daniel, as ever, stood by her side. His loyalty was unwavering, and together, they had faced the darkest forces the galaxy had to offer. Their bond, forged through struggle, sacrifice, and a deep mutual respect, would be the foundation upon which they could build a new future. Ariana could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her, but she also felt the strength that came from their shared experiences. She knew she wasn't alone in this. As the days passed, the people of Lumia Prime began to rebuild. The scars of war would take time to heal, but there was a sense of purpose in the air now, a sense that the future was something they could shape together. Ariana worked tirelessly, bringing in new voices to her council, ensuring that the mistakes of the past were not repeated. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but with each step, she felt herself becoming stronger, more confident in her role as queen. But even as she worked to restore her kingdom, Ariana's thoughts often turned to the Drachnid dissidents who had stood with her in the final battle. They, too, had paid a heavy price for their alliance, and their future was uncertain. There was much work to be done on both sides, but Ariana knew that this was a beginning. The Drachnids, once seen as enemies, could now be part of the solution. A new alliance, one built on trust and shared purpose, could be the key to a more peaceful galaxy. In the quiet moments, when the weight of leadership threatened to overwhelm her, Ariana found solace in the thought that, despite the darkness they had faced, a new beginning was possible. Lumia Prime would rise from the ashes, stronger and more united than ever before. The battle had been won, but the true victory lay in the future that had yet to be written, a future where love, sacrifice, and unity would be the guiding forces, and where Ariana would stand as a beacon of hope for all who had suffered. The aftermath was not the end, it was the beginning of something greater.